The flight had just taken off and the cabin was slowly settling into a quiet rhythm. Most passengers had their eyes closed, listening to music, reading, or trying to get comfortable for the hours ahead. But in the middle of the cabin, near the emergency exit row, a different kind of noise was filling the air. A baby was crying, loud, high-pitched, and relentless. The kind of crying that made heads turn, shoulders tense, and hearts race a little with frustration. The parents, sitting in the first-class section, were trying everything. The father, a man with a crisp suit and polished shoes, leaned forward and rocked his child gently in his arms. He whispered soft words, tapped the baby on the back, and even tried to offer a bottle. Nothing worked. The crying only grew louder, like the baby was determined to make sure the whole plane heard. The mother sitting beside him looked exhausted. Her hair was slightly messy, and her hands shook as she tried to soothe the child. She leaned over, cooing and whispering, but her voice barely made a difference. Around them, passengers were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A young woman in a blue scarf covered her ears and muttered under her breath, while an older man tapped his fingers against the armrest, clearly annoyed. Flight attendants hurried back and forth, offering toys, blankets, and water bottles, but nothing seemed to calm the crying. Some passengers looked toward the exits, silently hoping the flight would be over soon. Others just sighed and tried to focus on their screens or books, pretending not to notice. But the sound carried, echoing through the narrow cabin, impossible to ignore. The father's frustration was growing. He was a millionaire, used to having control over almost everything in his life. He had flown private planes before, dined in luxurious restaurants, and handled high-stakes business meetings without breaking a sweat. But here, thousands of feet above the ground, he was powerless. No amount of money, influence, or authority could quiet the wails of his baby. He checked his watch repeatedly, his forehead creasing, his lips pressed tightly together. He whispered to his wife, clearly irritated, "I don't know what else to do. Nothing is working." His tone was sharp, though he tried to hide it. She nodded silently, tears welling in her eyes from both exhaustion and embarrassment. Meanwhile, a boy sitting a few rows away was quietly observing the scene. He was a poor black boy, traveling alone with a small backpack filled with a few personal belongings. His clothes were simple, clean, but worn, and his shoes had clearly seen better days. Yet there was something about him that caught the eye. Not wealth, not status, but calmness. He watched the baby, the parents, and the restless passengers, noticing things that others overlooked. He saw the tiny flail of the baby's fists, the slight arch of its back in distress, the way the father's hand moved rigidly instead of fluidly, and the mother's soft but ineffective attempts at soothing. He understood somehow that the crying was not just noise. It was communication, a call for comfort, and he felt drawn to it. The boy didn't hesitate. He quietly stood up, holding nothing but his own calm presence, and walked toward the first-class section. Passengers glanced at him curiously. Who was this boy? What was he doing? Some frowned, assuming he had no business approaching, but he moved confidently without fear or hesitation. He stopped a few steps away from the crying baby, and for a moment he just stood there observing. He didn't talk, he didn't make sudden movements, and he didn't try to grab the baby. He simply positioned himself in a way that the baby could see him clearly, with a gentle, inviting expression on his face. The baby's crying didn't stop immediately, but there was a subtle shift in its behavior. Its eyes darted toward the boy, its tiny hands waving in curiosity. The father noticed and frowned. "Who is this kid?" he muttered under his breath. He felt protective and skeptical. How could a boy, clearly from a modest background, calm his child when he and the flight attendants had failed? But he stayed silent, watching with a mix of doubt and curiosity. The boy knelt slightly, lowering himself to the baby's level. He started to hum softly, a gentle melodic sound that was not loud, not demanding, but comforting. The hum was slow, steady, like a heartbeat. The baby's cries faltered slightly, then slowed and finally softened. The parents exchanged confused glances. The mother whispered, "Is he?" The father didn't answer, still watching with narrowed eyes. The boy continued humming, swaying very slightly from side to side. He made small, soft gestures with his hands. Not toys or distractions, just movements that were natural and kind. Passengers began to notice. A few leaned forward, whispering to each other, "Look at him. The baby is calming down." A flight attendant paused, surprised by the sudden change in atmosphere. The boy didn't stop. He maintained eye contact with the baby, smiling softly, and suddenly the baby stopped crying altogether. Its tiny body relaxed, and it even reached out a hand toward the boy. The cabin, which had been filled with tension, suddenly felt lighter. Some passengers exhaled quietly, smiling at the unexpected sight. Others reached for their phones, capturing the moment, unable to believe what they were seeing. The millionaire's expression shifted from frustration to disbelief. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees, staring at the boy and the now calm baby. He whispered to his wife, How did he do that?" She shook her head, equally stunned. Neither of them had ever seen anything like this before. The boy continued to hum softly, now making little playful noises and gestures. The baby responded with coos and tiny laughs, a sound so unexpected that the passengers couldn't help but smile. The mother looked at her husband, a mixture of relief and awe on her face. "I don't know who he is," she whispered, "but he's amazing." The boy didn't ask for anything. He didn't seek praise or attention. He simply focused on the baby, using his own calm presence and gentle actions to create a connection that no one else could. The parents, still recovering from shock, finally relaxed their tense muscles. The father straightened in his seat, taking a deep breath, and the mother adjusted the baby in her arms, still watching the boy with gratitude. The baby giggled, reaching up for the boy again, and this time the millionaire's awe was undeniable. He had expected money, status, and influence to solve problems, but here was a boy with nothing, calming his child with kindness alone. Around the cabin, whispers spread. Passengers were exchanging looks, some nodding in quiet approval. The boy returned to his seat, giving a small wave to the parents before sitting down. The baby's parents waved back, smiling through their lingering disbelief. The atmosphere in the plane had shifted from tension and irritation to amazement and quiet admiration. The flight attendants exchanged looks, amazed at the simplicity and effectiveness of what had just happened. The boy leaned back in his seat, quietly observing the rest of the flight. He was not seeking attention or reward, yet his presence had transformed the cabin. The millionaire, still watching, felt a shift inside himself. He realized that no amount of money could replace the power of empathy, patience, and understanding. He had been humbled by a boy who had nothing, yet offered the most valuable thing in the world, a gift of calm, connection, and care. The baby, now resting peacefully against its mother, occasionally looked toward the boy, its eyes filled with trust and curiosity. The parents exchanged smiles that were a mixture of relief, gratitude, and amazement. Passengers, too, carried a quiet sense of wonder, silently acknowledging the boy's gift. It was a moment that none of them would forget, a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could create the most profound impact, even in the most unexpected places. The calm in the cabin did not last long, but it was enough to show what had just happened. The baby, once restless and crying, was now curious and quiet. The boy, still sitting in his small seat a few rows away, watched intently. His eyes were calm but full of focus. He understood that calming a baby wasn't just about stopping the noise. It was about building a connection, giving attention, and making the child feel safe. The baby's mother looked relieved, but she also looked curious. She leaned slightly toward the boy, watching him carefully, almost as if trying to understand what he had done. The boy noticed her gaze, but didn't let it distract him. He knew he had to maintain the baby's trust. Slowly, he stood again and moved a little closer to the family. This time, he didn't just hum. He used his hands and body to create gentle, rhythmic movements, almost like a small dance. The baby's eyes widened with curiosity. Tiny hands reached out instinctively. The mother let out a soft laugh, a mixture of relief and wonder. Even the father, who had been tense and frustrated, now leaned forward in disbelief. He had seen many things in his life, but this was something he could not explain. The boy began to engage more actively with the baby. He made soft, playful noises, the kind that could make a child laugh even in a stressful situation. The baby responded instantly, letting out small giggles and trying to reach the boy's hands. The parents looked at each other, astonished by what they were witnessing. The baby had never responded like this to anyone outside the family, and here was a boy with no toys or gadgets, calming and entertaining their child effortlessly. Passengers around them began to notice. A few leaned forward, whispering to each other, amazed by the scene. A young woman even took a quiet photo, careful not to disturb the moment. The entire cabin felt a subtle change, a shift from tension and impatience to quiet amazement. The boy didn't stop. He seemed to have a natural understanding of how children thought and felt. He made eye contact, smiled, and adjusted his gestures based on the baby's reactions. Every laugh and coo from the child encouraged him to continue. He didn't overdo it or force attention. He was patient, allowing the baby to explore and react at its own pace. The baby's parents were watching in awe. The mother whispered to her husband, "I've never seen him so happy with anyone else." "It's incredible." The father, still skeptical, could only nod in agreement. He realized that money and influence couldn't create this kind of connection. It was something deeper, something human. The boy noticed the father's gaze and gave a small, polite nod. He didn't speak, but the gesture was enough to show respect. The father's tension began to fade. He leaned back slightly, observing quietly, and for the first time he felt a sense of humility. He realized that no amount of wealth could solve every problem, and some solutions came from places he had never imagined. The baby's laughter filled the space, light and innocent, bringing smiles to the faces of everyone nearby. Passengers who had been irritated earlier now found themselves smiling and even relaxing in their seats. It was remarkable how one small boy could change the mood of an entire cabin. The boy continued his gentle play, using small gestures and soft words. He pointed at the ceiling, then at his own hands, making simple, playful motions. The baby tried to mimic him, laughter following every attempt. The parents were captivated, leaning forward to watch the interaction. The mother whispered to the father, "He's like he understands the baby. He just knows what to do." The father nodded, still amazed. He thought about his own childhood, about how few people truly understood children, and he realized how rare this kind of empathy was. As the flight progressed, the boy didn't just calm the baby. He entertained and engaged the child in ways that no toy or gadget could. He created a small world of fun and curiosity, using nothing but his presence, his voice, and his gestures. The baby's eyes followed him constantly, filled with trust and joy. Even other passengers began to watch, quietly admiring the boy's natural talent. Some whispered quietly, asking each other who he was, while others simply smiled and watched, unable to take their eyes off the scene. The cabin, which had been tense and uncomfortable, was now filled with warmth and quiet excitement. The boy noticed small details. He observed when the baby started to fidget, when the attention span wavered, and adjusted his actions accordingly. He made sure the child never felt overwhelmed or pressured. It was a delicate balance, one that he managed perfectly. The baby's mother finally reached over, gently adjusting the baby's position, and whispered a soft thank you. The boy nodded politely, smiling humbly. He didn't ask for recognition, but the gesture of appreciation was enough. The father, too, finally let out a deep breath, feeling relief and admiration mix in his chest. Passengers continued to watch quietly, some whispering about how impressive the boy was. An older woman leaned over to her companion, whispering, "I've never seen anything like this. He's incredible." Others simply shook their heads in disbelief, smiling as the baby laughed. The flight attendants, who had been moving back and forth in frustration before, paused to watch. They were amazed at how simple human connection and kindness could create such a powerful effect. One of them quietly approached the parents, offering a soft smile. "Your child is lucky to have met him," she said gently. Time passed, and the baby's mood remained calm. The boy continued to interact, but more subtly now, making sure not to overdo it. He had a rhythm, a way of keeping the baby engaged without forcing attention. The millionaire father watched quietly, his mind racing with thoughts. He had never experienced anything like this. He realized that wealth and power could not guarantee control over every situation. In fact, they could not create trust, patience, or empathy. Those were gifts that came naturally to some, and he had just witnessed one in full display. The boy finally returned to his seat, quietly settling back into his small space. The baby's parents watched him with gratitude and amazement. The mother whispered, "I don't know how he did it, but thank you." The father nodded, words failing him. He realized that this boy, with so little in material terms, had offered more than anyone else on the plane could. He had offered connection, calm, and understanding, a gift that no amount of money could buy. As the flight continued, the cabin slowly returned to normal activities. Passengers read, listened to music, or watched screens, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a sense of calm, of quiet admiration for the boy who had made such a difference. The baby played happily with the mother, occasionally glancing toward the boy, eyes full of trust and curiosity. The parents whispered softly to each other, still amazed by what had just happened. The boy leaned back, quietly observing, content in the knowledge that he had helped someone in need, not for reward or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. The moment was simple yet powerful. A small boy with humble means had changed the entire flight. He had reminded everyone that kindness, patience, and understanding were more powerful than wealth or status. The millionaire seated in first class reflected deeply on the experience. He realized that true influence was not in money, but in the ability to connect, to empathize, and to act with care. It was a lesson he would carry with him long after the flight landed. The baby continued to laugh and coo, a sound that now filled the cabin with joy instead of tension. The parents exchanged smiles, still filled with disbelief and gratitude. Passengers whispered quietly, sharing the story among themselves, and the boy remained quietly in his seat, humble and composed. He had not sought attention, but attention had found him, and in that moment, he had shown everyone the extraordinary power of simple human connection. The flight was now well underway, and a quiet sense of curiosity filled the cabin. Passengers had begun to notice the unusual bond forming between the poor boy and the baby. What had started as a simple act of calming a crying child had grown into something more meaningful. The boy had an unusual way of understanding the baby's needs. Every time the child's gaze shifted, the boy followed it, adjusting his gestures and expressions to match the baby's curiosity and mood. The baby in turn responded instinctively, cooing, giggling, and reaching out for the boy as though he were a familiar friend. The parents were astonished. They had tried everything to calm their child, but nothing had worked like this. The father leaned back in his seat, reflecting on what he had witnessed. He had seen skilled caregivers, nurses, and even high-end nannies in his life, but nothing compared to this boy's natural ability. He whispered to his wife, "I can't explain it. It's like he just knows what the baby wants." She nodded, her eyes never leaving the interaction, filled with a mixture of relief and awe. The boy noticed their gaze but continued to focus on the child. He didn't perform for attention. He was genuinely engaged in connecting and making the baby feel safe. The boy's methods were simple but effective. He made small, playful sounds, used his hands to mimic movements the baby could understand, and maintained a calm, steady energy. The baby watched intently, fascinated by the boy's presence. Occasionally, the baby tried to mimic the boy's gestures, creating tiny moments of shared understanding. The passengers began to feel the difference. Whispers of admiration traveled through the cabin, and some even smiled, caught up in the quiet magic of the scene. The boy had a way of reading the baby's mood with uncanny precision. When the child began to fidget, the boy would adjust his approach, slowing his movements or changing his tone to match the baby's energy. When the baby became quiet and observant, the boy would gently introduce a playful gesture, eliciting laughter and delight. This rhythm created a bond that grew stronger with every passing minute. The parents were amazed, leaning closer and whispering to each other, unable to believe how naturally the boy had taken charge of the situation. The father, who had been skeptical at first, now felt a deep sense of admiration. He realized that true skill wasn't about knowledge or experience alone. It was about empathy and understanding. This boy, who had little in terms of wealth or status, possessed an intuitive wisdom that money could never buy. The mother whispered softly to her husband, "It's like he can speak the baby's language." The father nodded slowly, silent, but his eyes were filled with newfound respect. The baby's laughter continued to fill the air, a sound that brought warmth to everyone on board. Even passengers who had been irritated earlier now felt their moods lighten. Some watched quietly, whispering comments of amazement. A young couple in the row behind leaned over, clearly captivated. "Look at him," the woman whispered. "I've never seen anything like this." The man nodded, smiling. The boy's presence was transforming the environment. What had been tension and frustration was now joy and wonder. As the flight continued, the boy didn't just entertain the baby. He engaged the child's mind and curiosity. He pointed to the ceiling, waved his hands, and made gentle, playful expressions. The baby followed, trying to imitate. and each small attempt brought laughter and clapping from the parents. They watched in awe, realizing that this boy with no formal training or resources had a natural talent for connection. The father whispered to his wife again, "I wish I could understand how he does it." She shook her head, smiling. "Some things can't be taught. They're just innate." The boy noticed the father's fascination and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, a humble gesture that spoke volumes. The father felt a mix of humility and gratitude. He realized that despite all his wealth and experience, he had never truly understood the power of simple human connection. The boy was teaching without words a lesson in patience, empathy, and understanding. The mother reached over, gently adjusting the baby's position while keeping an eye on the boy, whispering a quiet thank you. The boy smiled softly, acknowledging the gratitude, but he never sought recognition or reward. Passengers continued to observe quietly. A few had pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the interaction. They whispered softly to each other, amazed by what they were seeing. "It's incredible," one said. "He's like a little miracle." Another nodded in agreement, whispering, "He's teaching everyone something without even trying." The cabin had transformed. The atmosphere was no longer tense or impatient. It was filled with admiration, wonder, and a quiet sense of hope. The baby remained calm and engaged, responding instinctively to the boy's gestures and soft sounds. Every laugh, every coo strengthened the bond. The boy was careful to adjust his pace, ensuring the baby was never overwhelmed. This careful attention showed an extraordinary level of empathy and understanding for someone so young. The parents watched, completely absorbed, unable to tear their eyes away from the extraordinary scene. As the boy continued, the father reflected on his own life. He had achieved success, wealth, and influence, but moments like this reminded him of what truly mattered: human connection, empathy, and kindness. He realized that these qualities could not be bought, and he silently admired the boy's natural talent. The mother whispered again, softly, "We should be so grateful. He's taught us more than any teacher or guide ever could." The father nodded, silent, still observing the boy with quiet awe. The baby's mood remained light and joyful. Even the smallest gestures from the boy elicited reactions, coos, and giggles. Passengers who had once been annoyed now watched with fascination. Some smiled openly. Others whispered to each other about how remarkable it was to witness such a genuine act of kindness. The flight attendants paused occasionally, exchanging quiet, impressed looks. One of them muttered under her breath, "I've seen many things in this job, but never anything like this." Time passed, and the boy's connection with the baby only grew stronger. He maintained a gentle rhythm, adjusting his actions based on the baby's responses. It was a delicate balance, and he executed it flawlessly. The parents, still astonished, leaned closer to watch, whispering softly to each other about the boy's natural skill and humility. The father, in particular, felt a sense of deep respect and gratitude. He realized that while he had the power to control many things in life, the boy's gift was something entirely different, a rare combination of empathy, patience, and understanding that could not be bought. The baby continued to laugh and explore, cooing happily at the boy's gestures. The mother smiled, her eyes reflecting both relief and admiration. The father, still thoughtful, whispered, "We've never met anyone like him." The mother nodded, unable to find words. The boy's quiet confidence and innate understanding had not only calmed their child, but had also left a lasting impression on them. Passengers continued to observe, some whispering stories to each other, others simply smiling in quiet admiration. The boy's presence had changed the dynamic of the entire cabin. What had started as a noisy, tense flight had transformed into a moment of wonder, a display of human kindness and empathy that affected everyone present. As the flight moved forward, the boy finally returned to his seat, quietly settling in but still aware of the baby's reactions. He remained calm, humble, and attentive. The parents watched with gratitude, realizing that the boy had not only calmed their child, but had also given them a powerful reminder of what truly mattered: compassion, patience, and understanding. The father whispered softly, "He's extraordinary, truly extraordinary." The mother nodded, holding the baby close and smiling warmly. The moment would stay with them forever, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures and the simplest acts of kindness could create the most profound impact. The boy had given them more than peace and calm. He had given a lesson in humanity that no wealth or influence could replicate. And as the flight continued, passengers carried a quiet sense of amazement, reflecting on the extraordinary scene they had witnessed. A young boy, humble and kind, making a lasting difference with nothing but his heart and his presence. The plane continued to soar above the clouds, and the quiet hum of the engines became almost comforting. Passengers who had earlier been tense or frustrated were now relaxed, caught up in the serene atmosphere that had replaced the chaos of the baby's cries. The poor boy remained in his seat, but his eyes never strayed far from the child. He had a calm confidence and understanding that true attention and care required presence and patience. The baby's parents, still amazed, watched closely, occasionally whispering to each other, unable to believe the transformation they were witnessing. The baby was calm and curious now, cooing happily and occasionally looking toward the boy. Every small gesture from him, his hands, his soft hums, his gentle facial expressions, elicited a delighted reaction from the child. The parents exchanged glances, their disbelief slowly turning into gratitude and admiration. The mother whispered softly, "I don't think I've ever seen him so engaged with anyone else." The father nodded, still reflective, realizing that their child's comfort was the result of something far beyond toys or expensive gadgets. It was the boy's natural gift for understanding and connection. The passengers around them had also noticed the remarkable dynamic. A few were smiling quietly, some whispering to each other about how extraordinary the scene was. The boy's calm presence seemed to affect the entire cabin, as if everyone had been touched by a subtle wave of kindness and understanding. Even flight attendants paused in their routines to watch, quietly impressed by the boy's ability to soothe and engage the baby without any material tools. One of them whispered under her breath, "It's amazing. He doesn't need anything but himself to calm the child." The father, still seated, reflected on the moment. He had spent his life surrounded by wealth and influence, yet here was a boy who had nothing but had managed to calm and entertain his child effortlessly. It was a humbling realization. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the boy, contemplating the lessons in empathy and patience he had just witnessed. The mother held the baby close, her gaze fixed on the boy, quietly thanking him without words. She could feel the gratitude deep in her chest, unable to express it fully, but knowing that it was shared by the father as well. The boy, aware of their attention, gave a small, polite nod, acknowledging their gratitude but not seeking any reward or praise. He understood that the reward lay in the baby's laughter and calm. He continued to make soft sounds, gentle gestures, and playful movements, keeping the baby engaged without overwhelming him. The child's eyes sparkled with joy, occasionally mimicking the boy's movements, and each small interaction deepened the connection between them. As the flight continued, the boy's focus never wavered. He understood the baby's small cues, a twitch of a hand, a shift in gaze, a tiny squeal. Each reaction guided him to adjust his approach, keeping the baby entertained, comfortable, and happy. The parents watched in quiet amazement, realizing that what they were seeing was not simply play. It was an intuitive understanding of a child's needs that they had never encountered before. The father, reflecting further, felt a mix of humility and gratitude. He realized that despite all his success, he had never encountered someone with such a natural gift for empathy and connection. He whispered softly to his wife, "He's extraordinary. No amount of money could have taught him this." She nodded in agreement, her eyes glistening with emotion. The baby cooed, reaching out for the boy once more, and the boy responded with gentle encouragement, allowing the child to feel in control and secure. Passengers continued to watch quietly, some whispering stories to each other, others simply observing in awe. The cabin was filled with a soft sense of unity, a shared experience of witnessing an act of kindness that transcended wealth, status, or circumstance. The boy's humble presence had brought warmth and joy not only to the baby and the parents, but also to everyone who had seen it unfold. The boy's ability to understand the baby extended beyond mere gestures. He seemed to sense when the child needed rest, when he was curious, or when he sought comfort. Each adjustment was seamless, natural, and deeply empathetic. The baby responded instantly, showing trust and comfort in the boy's presence. It was a quiet, powerful display of human connection, one that left the millionaire and his wife profoundly impacted. The father, A man accustomed to control and precision in every aspect of his life felt a lesson in humility. He realized that influence and authority could not substitute for empathy and genuine care. He watched the boy with silent admiration, feeling gratitude for the lesson he had just learned. The mother, holding the baby, whispered again to her husband, "We should be grateful to have witnessed this. It's rare to see such a pure heart." The baby continued to laugh, coo, and explore, responding to the boy's gentle prompts. The boy's soft hums, playful expressions, and careful gestures kept the child engaged without pressure or expectation. The parents watched in awe, noticing how the boy's patience and intuition guided every interaction. Even passengers who had been irritated earlier now smiled, feeling a shared sense of wonder at the scene. Time passed quietly. The boy had returned to his seat but remained attentive, keeping an eye on the baby. He didn't draw attention to himself. His focus was entirely on the child. The baby occasionally looked toward him, eyes filled with curiosity and trust. The parents continued to watch, their amazement slowly transforming into deep appreciation. They whispered softly to each other, reflecting on how this small boy with nothing but his heart had made such a profound impact. The cabin atmosphere had shifted completely. What had started as frustration, tension, and irritation had been replaced by calm, admiration, and a quiet sense of unity. Passengers whispered quietly to each other about the boy's extraordinary presence, some expressing disbelief, others quietly reflecting on the lesson in empathy they had witnessed. The flight attendants continued their work but did so with a sense of respect for the boy's natural ability to touch lives with kindness. The father, still thoughtful, reflected on his own life and priorities. He realized that success and wealth had limits when it came to human connection. True understanding and empathy he saw now were rare gifts, and he had been fortunate to witness one. He whispered softly to his wife, "I hope we never forget this. It's a reminder of what truly matters." She nodded, her eyes filled with emotion, holding the baby close. The boy, humble and quiet, remained a constant presence. He didn't seek praise or attention. His only concern was the baby's comfort and happiness. The child's laughter, coos, and occasional attempts to mimic the boy were reward enough. The parents watched in amazement, recognizing that this simple yet profound interaction had changed the atmosphere of the plane and touched everyone who had witnessed it. As the flight continued toward its destination, the boy's gentle presence remained a guiding force for the baby. Each small gesture, each soft sound reinforced the trust and bond that had formed. The millionaire and his wife reflected on the experience, realizing that despite their wealth and influence, they had learned a powerful lesson from a child far less fortunate, but infinitely wise in the ways of empathy. The cabin, once filled with tension, was now filled with quiet joy, shared admiration, and a renewed sense of humanity. The baby's laughter continued, now unrestrained, bringing warmth and light to the entire cabin. The boy's patience, intuition, and genuine care had created a ripple effect, touching not only the parents and the child but everyone who had witnessed it. The father whispered again softly to his wife, "He's given us more than peace. He's reminded us of what truly matters." She nodded, holding the baby close, tears of gratitude in her eyes. The boy, sitting quietly but attentively, had transformed a stressful situation into a profound moment of human connection. He had calmed the baby, brought joy to the parents, and inspired everyone around him. His humility and empathy were evident in every gesture, and the impact of his presence would remain with the passengers long after the flight landed. The lesson was simple yet powerful. True kindness, patience, and understanding could create change in ways that money and authority never could. And in that moment, high above the clouds, a small boy had reminded everyone of the extraordinary power of a compassionate heart. The flight was nearing its destination, and the atmosphere inside the cabin had completely transformed. What had begun as a tense, frustrating journey now carried a sense of calm, warmth, and quiet admiration. The baby, once inconsolable, now sat contentedly in the mother's arms, occasionally reaching out to the boy with curiosity and trust. The boy, humble and composed, remained attentive, occasionally offering a soft smile or gentle gesture, ensuring the child remained happy and engaged. The millionaire father observed quietly, his mind racing with thoughts. He had never encountered anyone with such a natural gift for empathy and understanding. Despite his wealth and power, he realized that some lessons could not be taught or bought. They had to be experienced. The boy had given them more than calm and laughter. He had shown them the extraordinary impact of patience, kindness, and human connection. He whispered softly to his wife, "I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. He's taught us more in these few hours than anyone else ever could." She nodded, holding their child close, tears of gratitude forming in her eyes. The boy's humility was as remarkable as his skill. He accepted no praise, no attention, no reward. His focus remained on the baby, making sure every movement and gesture was gentle and appropriate. The child responded instinctively, cooing, giggling, and even attempting to mimic the boy's small movements. The parents watched in awe, fully aware that this was a moment they would never forget. The boy had created a bond that transcended wealth, status, or background. He had reminded them of something far more valuable than money: compassion and empathy. Passengers continued to notice the extraordinary scene. Whispers of admiration traveled through the cabin, and some even smiled quietly to themselves. A young couple watched intently, quietly discussing how remarkable it was to see someone so young, humble, and kind. Flight attendants, once occupied with the chaos of the crying baby, now observed with quiet amazement. One of them muttered softly, "It's incredible how much difference one person's heart can make." The cabin had shifted from a place of stress and tension to one of quiet joy and shared admiration. The baby's laughter continued, filling the cabin with lightness. Each time the child looked toward the boy, a soft smile would cross the boy's face. He didn't perform or exaggerate. He remained calm, patient, and fully engaged. The baby's parents watched every interaction, completely absorbed. They had never seen their child respond this way to anyone outside their family. The mother whispered softly, "I can't believe it. He's just a boy, and yet he's extraordinary." The father nodded, feeling a deep sense of humility. Wealth and power had not been enough to calm their child, but the boy's empathy and patience had done what nothing else could. The flight continued, and the boy remained attentive, his small gestures and soft hums keeping the baby entertained and happy. The parents could see the trust their child had developed in such a short time. They whispered quietly to each other, reflecting on the boy's remarkable gift. The father said softly, "We've learned something today that money can't teach us. True understanding and care come from the heart." The mother nodded, holding their child close and smiling warmly. Passengers continued to watch in quiet admiration. A few discreetly recorded the moments, others whispered in amazement to their companions. The boy's presence had transformed the flight, creating a shared experience of wonder and appreciation. Even those who had been annoyed or frustrated earlier found themselves touched by the boy's quiet act of kindness. The atmosphere was no longer tense. It was filled with warmth, connection, and a subtle, profound sense of humanity. As the plane began its descent, the father finally approached the boy. He knelt slightly to meet his eyes, feeling a mix of humility, gratitude, and admiration. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly. The boy simply smiled and shook his head politely, acknowledging the gratitude but remaining humble. He didn't seek reward or recognition. His satisfaction lay in the baby's happiness and comfort. The mother joined them, holding the baby, her eyes shining with gratitude. She whispered, "You've made a difference in our lives today. Thank you." The boy gave a small nod, his gentle smile conveying more than words could. The other passengers watched quietly, some clapping softly, others smiling with appreciation. It was a rare moment of genuine connection that transcended background, wealth, and circumstance. The boy had reminded everyone present of the power of empathy, patience, and human kindness. The father, reflecting on the moment, realized that this experience would stay with him for a lifetime. He had been humbled and inspired, learning a lesson that no amount of wealth or influence could provide. Once the plane landed, the family prepared to disembark. The baby, still content and happy, looked toward the boy one last time, reaching out with curiosity and trust. The father and mother exchanged a final look of gratitude. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a reminder that the simplest acts of kindness, patience, and empathy could leave lasting impressions on lives in ways no wealth could. The boy quietly stood, ready to leave with his modest belongings. Passengers continued to watch, some offering small nods or smiles of respect. The father, unable to contain his gratitude, approached the boy once more. "I hope we can stay in touch," he said softly. The boy nodded politely, a humble acceptance of the offer, understanding that his impact had reached far beyond the immediate moment. As the passengers exited the plane, conversations quietly reflected on the boy's remarkable presence. The baby's laughter, once a source of chaos, had become a symbol of joy and connection. The parents carried the memory of this moment deeply, grateful for the boy who had taught them a lesson in empathy, patience, and kindness. Even those who had merely observed were subtly changed, reminded of the power of genuine human connection. The boy, walking down the aisle with quiet confidence, left a trail of smiles and awe behind him. He had done nothing extraordinary in terms of wealth or status, but his humility, understanding, and natural empathy had transformed a stressful situation into an unforgettable moment of joy and connection. The millionaire father watched him leave, a profound sense of respect and gratitude filling his heart. He realized that true greatness was not in wealth, power, or influence, but in the ability to connect, empathize, and make a difference in someone else's life. The baby's laughter and curiosity had left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. The boy's quiet humility, his natural skill, and his empathy had created a ripple effect, touching passengers, parents, and crew alike. The father whispered softly to his wife as they left the plane, "We'll never forget this. Today we learned a lesson worth more than all the wealth in the world." The mother nodded, holding the baby close, tears of gratitude shining in her eyes. The story of the boy, the baby, and the millionaire's family would linger in the memories of everyone who had been on that flight. It was a reminder that true impact comes from understanding, empathy, and the ability to care deeply, without expectation or reward. The boy had shown that even in the smallest, quietest ways, a single act of kindness could touch lives and leave an indelible mark on the hearts of others. As the passengers went their separate ways, the lesson remained: humanity, compassion, and empathy have a power that surpasses wealth, status, and material influence. The boy had proven that the simplest gestures, guided by a pure heart and an understanding mind, could calm the most restless of souls, inspire admiration, and create lasting connections. And in that moment, high above the clouds and on the ground that awaited them, everyone carried a quiet but profound understanding of what it truly means to make a difference in another person's life.